Welcome to Reading the Room, a literary podcast featuring author interviews and discussions with bookish content creators. I am your host, Jalen, also known as The Bar and the Bookcase on YouTube. Today I am so thrilled to be joined by Sarah Rose Etter, author of Ripe, available today from Scribner. Sarah's novel is doing so many things that I absolutely look for in fiction, and one of them being it plays with form significantly while also looking at late capitalism and really exploring what it means to be working in Silicon Valley and following one woman as she navigates her struggles and also has a black hole following her. I am a huge fan of books that play with form, and Sarah Rose Etter does really interesting things with imagery and definitions, and it was just a blast to read and talk to her about it, and it was really fascinating learning how this all kind of came about for her and thinking about what it means to publish a novel while also writing a novel about working and what that feels like when you are trying to seek something with your art while also trying to make a career out of it and also working full-time at the same time. Before we get into the discussion today, I will give you a brief synopsis of the book. A year into her dream job at a cutthroat Silicon Valley startup, Cassie finds herself trapped in a corporate nightmare. Between the long hours, toxic bosses, and unethical projects, she also struggles to reconcile the glittering promise of a city where obscene wealth lives alongside abject poverty. Ivy League grads complain about the snack selection from a conference room with the view of houses people bathing in the bay. Startup burnouts leap into the paths of commuter trains, and men literally set themselves on fire in the streets. Though isolated, Cassie is never alone. From her earliest memory, a miniature black hole has been her constant companion. It feeds on her depression and anxiety, its size changing in relation to her distress. The black hole watches, but it also waits. Its relentless pull draws Cassie ever closer as the world around her unravels. When her CEO's demands cross an illegal threshold and she ends up unexpectedly pregnant, Cassie must decide whether the tempting fruits of Silicon Valley are really worth it. Sharp but vulnerable, funny yet unsettling, Ripe portrays one millennial woman's journey through her late capitalist hellscape and offers a brilliantly incisive look at the absurdities of modern life. A great way of supporting the podcast is leaving a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Now, without further ado, let's get into the discussion with Sarah Rose Etter. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I love your podcast so much. I feel so lucky to be here. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. I mean, I've been so stoked to have you on. I've been, preparing for this for a while now, and just
Oh.
I'm hoping I can do justice to what this book is doing because I think it's a feat in terms of how much you were able to pack into this book. I know yesterday I tweeted about how obsessed I am with the structure of this book, and I feel like a lot of my questions are probably going to be nerdy form questions, but I think it really speaks to what's going on in this book. So I just wanted to start before I get into, into Ripe and the fruit of it all and the structure, just where this novel sort of started for you.
Yeah, I have been thinking a lot about how works of art sometimes are created by the circumstance that the person is in. And so for me, it was really, I'll be serious first and then we can get funny later. My father passed away pretty shortly before we went into lockdown, and he had wanted me to write this book. And so it was really this combination of like, I was in a really big space of grief, and then I didn't have any way to get away from it, right? Like, usually when you're in grief, like you could go see a friend or go to the bar or like do something like totally self-destructive to get away from it and like not have to deal with it. And I kind of found myself in this position where I was really alone with it, and everyone else was like baking bread. And I was like, I think I should write the book he wanted me to write. So yeah, I mean, that was really the beginning of it. I had worked in Silicon Valley for about a year, and I would kind of call home and like tell him all the crazy stuff I was seeing, and he would always be like, write this down and take notes, and one day like you're going to write a book about this and you're going to make $1 million. And I'm like, whatever, dad, and then it kind of felt like the best way to do him justice and like the best thing I could do with all these things I was feeling. And I do think that's a lot of what's in the book, is this compression of circumstances that it was really a big part of. It's really a function of the reality we were living in, I think, at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, even, I guess I'll save this for later in terms of how, a virus is features in this book and also Cassie and her parents and their dynamic. I'm wondering kind of how that maybe, I don't know, how you wrote through that. Not to like do the standard question of like asking how much of this is autobiographical, but there are certain, elements here that can maybe speak to your life. And so, I mean, just so I guess before we get into all of that, let's start
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
structure here and the intro figure. I'll hold it up for viewers. The novel is based around this structure. And like, how do you, as a writer, get here to start thinking about a novel? I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite part is the part when I'm like alone in my yoga pants and I have like a messy bun up and probably my teeth aren't brushed because when I'm in the thick of like drafting, it is like truly an obsession. Like it's like I wake up in the morning, it's the first thing I'm doing. My teeth don't stay unbrushed all day. But I do mean like when I get up and I have a cup of coffee, like the next thing I'm doing is drafting. And so there's an element to keep me going that is really I need to play a little. I need to have some kind of like fun or like a structure that makes sense to me. I have a little bit of like OCD. And so for me to tell a story, I need to have some kind of organizational pattern. And I think there are things that I don't even know the reader would see, but things that I needed to help me finish it. And I do have this kind of desire at all times to balance out every image. So there's like a lot of reoccurring themes and things that are woven through. And all those structures, I think about this a lot when I teach, right? When you climb a mountain, you have those like flag points, right? You don't go straight up. And so sometimes the structure for me initially is a flag point to just help me finish the draft. And some stuff gets stripped out and then, the reader never sees it. And some things stay. And the pomegranate was always going to stay because I don't know what happened. I just became obsessed with the fruit. I was like researching it. I was eating it. The painting on the cover, I had actually been painting that during lockdown because I loved the painting. And then somehow it became the cover, which always blows my mind because I wasn't thinking like that. But it was just such a rich fruit. It has such a crazy history. All the art that's been made about it is wild. I was, really just deep in it. And I wanted to use that structure to kind of explore this story. And then the same thing kind of happened with black holes. I became also obsessed with them. And so I do think part of it was just sitting in a room and playing and following what made sense to me at the time. And I think that's something I always want to see writers do more of because I think visual artists get to do it a lot. Like they're always like shifting stuff around and messing and playing. And so I think that's kind of the structure. That's where it comes in for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think I always say this in interviews, but the novel is such a capacious form that I love when I see writers, just try something new or something that I haven't seen before, because there's so much fun to be had, I think, in novels that I feel like as much as dark as this book is, I feel like there is a lot of play in a sense involved in it, which kind of gives some levity to the reader, I think. At least it did for me. And I mean, even for like certain sections where you give like vocabulary or definitions for certain words that become a thematic tie for certain like vignettes. I'm wondering, like, do you write certain sections and then you think like what word kind of encapsulates this, or do you give yourself like, for example, let me just pull it up. I should like, let's see here. First one I can find, sex. There we go. Like, do you go there, or like, how does that kind of
Yeah.
come to you?
So, the definitions, I kept waiting for someone during editing to be like, take them out, you don't need them. But for me, there's sort of a way to work in the flashbacks. I don't love flashbacks as like I don't know. I can take or leave a flashback. But in this case, I wanted them to kind of function as a memory, the way a memory works. And to me, that's very much like you might get a scent of like a perfume and suddenly you're overcome with this memory. You might hear a phrase or a song. And that's kind of how I wanted them to work, is like she's hearing or thinking of a word and then being kind of like tunneled back in her memory to where her associations are. And so I hoped that that was a way to balance out who she is now and why she's making the decisions she is with where she came from without having to do like, I don't know. I always feel like flashbacks are kind of boring. I wanted them to be short and punchy, and I didn't want them to have to be linear. And it gave me room to just give you as much information about her as you actually needed versus like, let's go find out what her father's lineage was. And like, I don't know, that's not really my jam. I can't help it. And so yeah, that was the function for me, is I wanted them to kind of function the way memory does, which is a little non-linear and unexpected, and you can't really pick when you're going to get kind of punched in the gut with a memory of something that had a huge impact on you.
Yeah, I mean, even like Cassie reflects on this in terms of memory, like the fallibility of memory, and thinking about like how much of her identity is kind of a construction of like her fake self. She often kind of brings that out of her in meetings or just generally trying to embody someone else. And I think the way you play with memory, it makes so much sense and it just reads very seamlessly. And I just liked how it kind of informed more about Cassie as a person, as you're saying. But I'm wondering, in terms of kind of balancing that idea of memory with this other kind of looming force over her, the black hole, as a character. I The black hole is so fascinating to me for so many reasons, but I'm wondering how you kind of always made sure that the black hole was present or kind of this like shadowy force that was always kind of creeping over Cassie. Like, how did you, I guess, general question, open floor of like, how did you construct the black hole generally?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason I'm always drawn to a surreal element is I want to leave a place for the reader to meet me and give them something they can project on. And things like the black hole, or in the Book of X, like the knot in her body, that might mean one thing to me, but for a reader, it could mean something totally different. And like ultimately for me, I do think my desire to research the black holes was kind of based on grief, because they are similar to grief, right? You can choose to enter grief and never come back out. It's shapeless, it's formless, it changes space and time. It like that's the real impact of it. For her, it's depression. For someone else, it could be anxiety, pick your poison. I do I do sometimes think it was the stupidest decision in the world to try to turn this like supernatural phenomena that we don't understand into a character in a book, right? Because it was just impossible. Like the editing process, in some drafts, it would talk to her. In some drafts, it was like sucking up techies, trying to figure out, but all of that felt so cute and like funny. And it was like, this isn't a funny thing. This is like her reckoning with life and death and infinity and her feelings. And like, so that took a long time. I read so much research on black holes. I mean, I always say to my friends, I'm like, if there was like an astrophysicist convention, I could probably speak like in the basement on like a side track. Like I couldn't go on the main stage, but like I could tell you some things about black holes. And as we were drafting it, the science was changing so I was finishing the book while all this new research was coming out, and the ending just kept changing, because it was like, oh, now they're wormholes. Now, when I first wrote the draft, like they weren't wormholes. They were just, you know, you just died if you went in. And now it's like, thankfully, towards the end, they kind of made all these new discoveries. So there was a lot of change in that respect. But no, I do hope that it is something that allows us to all see that we've all got something like that trailing us, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be the same thing, but it is a human experience that we're all walking around with on some level.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the main plot points in the book is Cassie's pregnancy, and she has some reflections on whether she'll pass on like a black hole to her child or those kind of ideas too, or like do other people have this black hole following them, or just these kind of general questions of what it means for her. And so one question I have for you, again, this goes to just I guess I'm just kind of in awe. I feel like all my questions are just like, how did you do this? But like, there's so many different like I don't know, conflicts in this book. There's a ton. So like I wrote down a bunch of them. So there's a black hole, there's addiction, there's the chef who she's in a relationship with and he's in an open relationship and she wants something more from him but doesn't know if she can expect it. There's her pregnancy, there's rent increases, wildfires, the virus, her job. I'm wondering, so in terms of like from realism and narrative, how you knew how far to go with each of those plot points and how many to add versus delete. I mean, it's a very real experience that many people, experience all of these things, and I'm just wondering how you knew from a novelistic perspective how to like work with those.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of help from my agent Kent, who gives great edits, and then also my editor Emily at Scribner. Initially, there was more of a reference to like Black Lives Matter, and there was a lot more to do with a lot of other social issues. And eventually we came to the idea that it needed to be on a timeline that was based in reality. And so we determined like, okay, the book would have to end on March 16th, before lockdown, before there were really masks, before COVID really hit America, in order for it to not become a COVID book. And so some of the social issues really had to change based on what actually happened at that time, right? Because the Black Lives Matter protests happened after we went into lockdown, right? So we really adjusted some of the social issues to be what actually was happening at the time in San Francisco, which was rent protests, forest fires. So that stuff, I mean, honestly, we did a lot of research in order to make it based in what she would have been facing at that moment. And so there were certain things that we had to take off the table, because it is overwhelming. If you put it all in there, why are we alive? Right? Like, and I do think, I don't know if you feel this way, and I don't know if everyone feels this way, but it does feel like something happened that has really shifted the world that we're living in. I don't remember, I mean, I remember people being unhoused when I was young, but not to this extent. You know what I mean? Like I do feel like something has fundamentally changed where we're starting to have to reckon with a lot of things. A lot of decisions we made decades ago are now kind of coming home to roost. And they're all things that I think, when I think about this book, I think it's really about an individual who feels very trapped by a lot of systems that she can't really individually make a huge impact on. And I think that's, I saw somebody, I'm not supposed to look at Goodreads, but I saw someone at Goodreads being like, she should have done more to help the unhoused. And it's like, let me tell you how many white women with depression in Silicon Valley I saw solving the housing crisis. None.
Yeah.
like it, so I also was like, I really wanted to portray reality. Like, and if you do open a newspaper or look at any headline, some days aren't you just like, are we doing all this? Like, we're doing all this. Could I have one good news? A single good news, please. um,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I did kind of want to have that compression of like, it gets to it a little bit in the book. We can read news about everything all the time at any minute. And when it all sounds really bad, it does create this feeling of just like claustrophobia and helplessness. And I think that's really what she's going through.
I think that is replicated in the reader's experience as well. At least I can speak to my experience reading the book. This is the first novel that I feel that I've read that touches on all of these, very present issues that really, again, going to this idea of realism, like I felt very claustrophobic and very unsettled and deeply like kind of panicky while reading the book. And I think I'm glad to have that feeling. I love having that feeling, when reading a novel. It's not the best feeling to have, but I like it
It's
from a
better
reader's
than no
perspective.
feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's hard to replicate it in a way that feels one realistic, but also like doing justice to kind of exploring them in a way that feels, I guess, authentic or real. That when I was reading it, I felt, called out, for lack of a better word, or just kind of like I felt very seen by the way Cassie thinks about the world because I think about it in a very similar way. And I'm wondering for you, do you see this book as one being one that instills hope in its reader at all? Or do you think it kind of embodies a complete, kind of bleak perspective?
I think that comes down to how you want to read the ending. And always want there to be flexibility on that. And I know how I read it. But I also want there to be a lot of interpretations. And so I don't know if I felt comfortable giving people a lot of hope based on what I'm looking at in the world right now. And I think that's the trick of it, right? If you think this is a negative, depressing book, I mean, the challenge to me is almost, well, I would love for you to point to something right now that counters what this is getting at, right? And so unfortunately, I feel that it is true. It's a true book. And that sometimes isn't reassuring. But what I think one thing that happens in the internet is that we read all this stuff by ourselves. And then we're having this kind of lonely but global experience. And we end up being alone, but we're together and we don't realize it. And I think maybe hopefully the feelings she's having will show that all of us are feeling this at the same time, even though we feel quite disconnected and we see like rates of loneliness are skyrocketing. I think her interaction with the news and with the world around her is actually a global experience. I don't even think it's just San Francisco. I think you could put this story in any city you want right now. It's spread that badly. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I want to say that I'm hopeful, but mostly I think the radical thing that we can do is try to find ways to like find joy in our day-to-day lives. And that's personal. That's how we all do that is different. But I hope maybe it underscores the fact that we're all feeling this together. We really are,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's kind of what I was trying to get at too, of like how the book is unsettling. But what I love as a reader is being able to find a novel like this that does speak to that truth, but it feels comforting in a sense of being like having an object to hold that kind of speaks to that and kind of embodies what that feeling is. So you kind of feel less alone in those experiences. And I think that's an incredible, takeaway from writing a novel like this. I don't know if you have anything to say on that before I dive into some more specifics, but
I mean, I have some political things. I guess what I want to say is I do think everything has been built to make us all feel like we're separate so that we won't work together. And I think that is where um when I don't want to get too deep into it, but when I look at like France, right? And they protest everything. It's like, oh, they want to make us like wait one more day to retire. We're shutting the whole city down. We're on the train tracks. No. And I wish we had a little more of that unity in America. And I do see hope when I see people organizing and unions moving together. I see more of that happening now. And I hope we continue because I do think we've built a scenario where we all feel alone and under attack. And the reality is we're all under attack together. And that if we can overlook these kind of markers of class, if we can really start thinking about the way in which America's very aspirational capitalism has made us all think we're separate, um, maybe we could start making real progress as a group instead of these individual factions that feel like their cause is more important. Like, we're all in trouble a little,
one thing that I wrote down was just this idea of how you balance the macro versus micro. So looking at the very, singular experience of Cassie versus big, grand, even like in like your descriptions of like the galaxies or thinking about black holes, these big kind of concepts compared to her. Like, do you think that that was a way of you trying to explore this idea of collectivism in a sense, or just trying to kind of see how the macro kind of ties all those things together, maybe in a more like abstract way?
Yeah, I hope it underscores the fact that she thinks she's alone, but reality is if you went into the brains of almost anyone else around her, they might be feeling exactly the same way, but they're not allowed to talk about it. There's no space to talk about it. I think, yeah, 100%. I wanted to illustrate the individual against these systems that kind of keep you stuck. And, is she trapped? Woe is her. She has a six-figure job. I get it. And also, we've reached a crisis point in housing and in the economy that like that's not leading to the American dream that her parents told her. If she did everything right, if she did all the right stuff, she would get the house, she would be successful, she would get the money. And it's not quite there. And I think that's a reckoning that a lot of us are having, especially when we were raised by people where things weren't this bad. And now we're in it and we're like, wait a minute, I'm never going to own a home. It's just not going to be in the cards for me. And so, I think she's kind of right at that point as well. But yeah, so I do think individual up against a lot of difficult systems that she doesn't feel like she can have a lot of control over. And also, let's be real, how much help is someone who's suffering this much depression and who's pregnant going to be able to offer to these bigger problems? You know what I mean? So that's another reality. My dad had this saying all the time, which was like, we have a 40-hour work week, so we can't protest, right? If we all work 20 hours a week, we could go protest all the time. But here it's like we protest on the way to brunch, or we go to brunch after you know what I'm saying? It's like we're protesting on nights and weekends, anything to not stop working. And that's kind of crazy if you think about it.
Yeah, I mean that just reminds me of the one scene, the brunch scene, in which some of the other characters say like, "Go have fun at your protest while we have like mimosas and eat brunch." Yeah, it's stark, but very true. And I mean, I know you're speaking about how your father informed this
Mhm.
book. I want to dive into some of the more specific, I guess, like systems that are at work here and various characters and stuff. So I wanted to start with the parents and how you kind of constructed them in the flashback scenes and how they even inform Cassie's story through to the very end. How did that work for you?
So I after my father died, I wanted to find a way to like capture things he had taught me. And so I think there's a lot of him there for me just because like I started to get worried I would forget him, you know? Um, but then like with the mom, it was kind of like I want to create a scenario where she has it almost built into her to be stressed about money and work, right? It's almost like, I keep thinking about this. When you hit your like late 20s, early 30s, I think you start to look at the systems that raised you, including your parents and their relationship, what hopefully if they were involved in your life or not, whatever, you get a new sense of yourself as an individual, and you start to look at what was like baked into my head from the beginning that might not be right, and they're like, maybe I need to start challenging or rethinking. And I think for her, she's like right about to be at the point of thinking like, maybe I don't need to be psycho about work. Maybe the money isn't the thing. Maybe I should go work at a nonprofit and make no money and I'll be happy because it'll be rewarding, and so I do think her parents kind of have baked a mentality into her that I think a lot of our parents might have, which is the idea that like, go get your degrees, get your job, you're going to be, and don't deviate from the plan. You got to do the plan. And maybe now she's taking a look back and being like, I don't know if this is true or true for me, and so I think that's a reckoning that she's, right on the edge of having. And I think that's the crisis that it's trying to illustrate. But in terms of like the relationship with her parents too, I mean, our parents are like our first model for what a marriage is, right? From the very beginning. And so like her view of a relationship is already warped out of the gate, and so that's how I think you might find yourself in a scenario that she's in, where she's accepting less than she should have because it looks a lot better than what she's seen, you know. But yeah, I think there's a lot of layers to it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things you spoke on that I want to dive into. I mean, I don't want to talk about myself too much or make this about me, but this novel, you're catching me at an interesting time of making a big life pivot for myself to start working in book publishing, and I've been having a lot of these. I'm in my late 20s now, and just thinking about like all these questions that you're just bringing up, and it's a really scary, weird feeling to have so I've been a lawyer for almost 4 years, and I went to law school for 3 years before that, and just kind of making the choice to step away from it has been really like terrifying. It's different than what's going on in this novel, but I just wanted to speak to maybe my personal kind of experience, just because I think you capture that very, I don't know, scary feeling so well in what Cassie's experiencing, and I don't know.
I actually want to say, like, I have had this experience with most of my books where it seems like it opens up a floor for people to talk about their experience. And I actually really welcome that. I love it. Sometimes it's hard because people will share things like they're really big traumas, and I don't always feel like equipped to handle it. But I actually think like what you're bringing up right now is what I hope happens in the novel, is that we can start having conversations about how scary these decisions are and how hard it is to undo yourself and become hopefully the version of yourself that is more fulfilled, happier, and ultimately I think the minute we can divorce our self-worth from our jobs, the better. And also being able to work on something you really care about is always going to be a lot better than doing the thing that your parents told you was the right thing. I mean, I don't know about you, both of my parents, I think I'm the first woman in my family that went to college, right? My grandparents all came over from Ireland and Italy. And so it was a loaded time because your parents are like, you're going to do better than us, you're going to make more money than us, do not go to school for fiction, you got to be a journalist, a real writer, right? You have to have a job. There was no money waiting for me. And so some of those decisions you make are for protection and so that you can feel safe. Like, I still work full time in tech because I have a scarcity background where money was up and down my whole life, and I want to know I'm secure. And so those decisions we make are truly loaded. I think the best thing we can do is try to find a job that pays us enough to live the way we want to live in the way that we feel safe, and one that at least isn't abusive and doesn't devalue us as humans. And that's kind of the best we can hope for, you know.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to kind of reckon with that because, I've had this kind of worry about like, yeah, I love books in my free time and I love, pursuing or like talking to authors and stuff like that. And like, does making that like my profession, like actually working in the industry, does that instantly kill or like zap the happiness like under capitalism? Like, is that going to happen? Like, and I have no idea. I
You
hope
know,
not. But like, it's a real question,
I have two thoughts about that. One is that major decisions in our lives, I was reading this great New Yorker nonfiction piece about this. Really big decisions, changing your job, having a kid, getting a dog, you don't know how you're going to feel till you do it. And that's the thing, there you will not know. Some people don't want to have kids, have a kid, and then love having kids. The opposite happens. Some people really think they want a dog, they get a dog, it's a fucking nightmare. And the same thing is true for career changes, for relationship decisions. The only thing I think about all the time is you already know what happens if you don't do it because you're already living it, right? And so you have to try. And no one can tell you what's on the other side. But I'll go back to my dad again. He was brilliant for all of his issues. The floor is only going to drop out from under you in your life a handful of times, like major life shifts. You're moving across the country, you're getting married, you're changing jobs, whatever. And he always said, try to just enjoy it instead of being afraid of it. Try to just know that like you're rolling the dice right now and you're gonna see what comes up. And like instead of being scared, what if you just were like, okay, this feels weird, let's find out. And that's all you can do. There, you know what I mean? And if you find out you hate it, guess what? You'll just go get another job.
Right.
This isn't gonna, you know, nothing we do right now is the end until we're dead. So like worst case scenario, you do this for 2 years or a year and you find out it's killing your love of books and you go become an art teacher. I don't know. You're going to have many lives. And so, you know, it helps a little to hold it a little loosely and not put so much pressure on it. At least that's where I've gotten to.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think you use, the image or just like the various definitions around black holes to kind of explore these questions of like, is there a point of no return? Will you come out of it? Will you not? And I think I never really had thought about black holes before, but it's a really interesting way of thinking about or like structuring your life or just thinking about life in that kind of way is interesting. And I mean, for you, in terms of your knowledge about black holes, just quickly, asking like, how much of your day now do you like spend thinking about like black holes and researching them, and how like deep is the research now?
Oh, I mean, like I was researching them for so long. I mean, I was reading, and I mean, I don't even mean like, oh, the popular books. I mean, like I was reading like papers about how this is the only scientific phenomena that is so complicated that we gave it like a loose name, right? Like we don't call things black holes because in science, they have words for things, but this is so complicated. We had to create a language that was like casual so that people could start to wrap their heads around them. And so like there's great papers about how we've personified them. We make them eat things and ingest things, and they have to be acting like a person because we can't fucking understand what they're doing. So we have to turn them into like a character almost, not even just in this novel, but like when you read any headline about them, they're ingesting, they're doing human stuff and they're not human. And so I just like got a kick out of the fact that there's this thing that exists that like we've barely seen in real life. Only very recently have we seen any pictures, and like picture I use as a very loose term. And so yeah, they're just kind of fascinating. And I don't know, when I started doing the research, I couldn't stop. And then part of it was the editing process. My agent would be like, I want you to dial up the black hole. And I would be like, do you know what that means? I have to go read more papers. Like, could you please stop with this? Oh God, it was maddening. But yeah, I still find them fascinating. I'm still like keeping an eye on them and like what happens if you go in one, and why? Like, and I think about a lot about Stephen Hawking, like what a sad thing to, if you ever watch his speech at Harvard when he's talking about discovering that black holes are ingesting matter, and then when they vanish, the matter's not coming back out, right? Which defies the central law of physics. And the thing he's saying in this very sad, it sounds so melancholy, even though he has like that, like robotic mechanical voice support that he uses. It still sounds very sad when he says it, because he's basically saying like, if it's true that black holes can eat matter and the matter never comes back, then like all the laws of physics as we know them could be disproven, right? That's like not a cool thing to discover if you don't mean to. Like you're accidentally undoing all of our understanding of memory, history, everything. And so I always thought that was just kind of like so beautiful, but kind of tragic, right? And then he spends the rest of his life trying to disprove his own theory because he's so desperate to like Anyway, this is the way I understand it. I'm sure a bunch of astrophysicists are going to come for my ass. Being like, that's not what happened, but this is my understanding of it. And so yeah, I don't know. I did get really tied up in like the people who have made it their life's work to understand these things that are so ununderstandable. Yeah.
And I think the way that you can do that, in a novel, that seems so difficult. So I just have to commend you for like, distilling all of that
I
information and trying to
really
make
wanted
it.
to rip my hair out so many times. And I joke about this all the time. I'm like, I'm the most fact-checked fiction writer ever. Like even with Book of X, with this, it's constantly like I have rigorous fact checking. And I'm like, this is fiction, but it's got to be right. At least the time of print, it needs to be as right as it can be.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, kind of switching gears a little bit, I want to ask you about just her job
Mhm.
generally, and one character in specific. I just wanted to maybe talk to you about how terrible Sasha is, and how just how you like crafted, the kind of the villains of the workplace. And I'm wondering if you might have had fun doing that in a sense, or is that just not your your experience of kind of creating those monstrous people in the workplace?
I think that everything is like a compilation of things I've seen and heard, right? And so I think a lot about how is it based in reality versus is it truthful? And that's kind of my delineation, right? Like, did some of these things happen to me? Sure. Did some of them definitely not? Absolutely. Like, it really depends what page you're picking up. But I really wanted to just encapsulate the feeling of having a really bad boss, which we've all had. And if you just like keep enough eye on it, it gets pretty easy to write them. But I do think there is a type of boss who's bad in a way that like right walks the line of illegal, and that you can't quite get them for that anything specific, but you can tell there's something that's like not right and you don't feel good. Like you don't feel safe and good. And that's where she's at. She doesn't feel safe and good. And I think the same is true. I mean, you definitely see it. I mean, I haven't been through this recently because things have obviously Me Too has been huge, but like there were men in the workplace who would like sexually harass you in the same way, where it comes right up to the line. But it's like not quite enough to get him fired, but like but you're still like, this is definitely not okay, And so I think that's kind of where she's at with this boss. And then the other thing is, Sasha became a really sad character to me. The more that I wrote her, I started to think like what she's doing to Cassie and these other employees is terrible. And also, isn't she so tragic? Like, what a shitty life, And it's something, there's a lot of research being done about this, about how women in Silicon Valley are so surrounded by toxic men that they start mirroring that behavior and sometimes become worse because they need to survive. And so, yeah, I think she's a pretty good example of that too.
Yeah, and I guess maybe my question didn't do enough, justice to explain the nuances of what you're doing with the character of Sasha, but just, some of the subplots there of what she, has Cassie do, and, various excuses she makes for her own failures and puts them on her. Like that was really of course frustrating for, the reader to experience. And I think you do that really well. But one other, small character that I think does a lot of work despite, brief page count is just the man that lives outside of Cassie's window. And I don't know if what you want to share about, crafting him, but I think you do an interesting thing, kind of going back to your ideas about collectivism and the differences between people across class, and how you went about writing him into the story.
Yeah, I mean, that is real. That happened to me in San Francisco. I had a man who lived under my window, and it just chewed me up. And there was like nothing I could do for him. I wasn't going to call the police. They're not going to do anything. They're going to make it worse. They're going to do something horrible. And there's nothing I could do for this person. And I heard him suffering every night, all night long. And like, what kind of life is that for two people that are like separate, but we're obviously sort of together in some level? Because I can hear his pain. And I mean, I guess, yeah, you can leave food sometimes, but like, you're not helping really, you're helping for a meal, but you're not like helping him have, so it just, yeah, that one, I don't want to say it was easy to write because it wasn't, but that was just what I was seeing, and that was what I was experiencing. And I don't think it hit me until I left San Francisco how much I was just absorbing and the empathy that I felt for him. I don't think I was even really sleeping when I lived there, because I was hearing somebody who was just going through hell every night. And when I did leave San Francisco, I remember going to sleep in my new apartment in a different city and realizing like I hadn't been like deeply sleeping because I could just hear someone suffering. And so like, what do you do with that? I don't know. I guess you put it in a book and hope someone else understands how that feels, you know? Yeah.
And I mean, he features, through to the end of the book. And I guess I had two more questions for you about this, and then we'll have a fun question about book recs. But
You want to do a fun question? Okay, okay.
I know, I'm so like sorry I've been getting in the weeds of
No,
like all
no,
the
I have
sad
to tell you
stuff.
something. I literally just said the other day to my friend. So you know who's the girl that wrote the book about the history of hot dogs? Jamie Loftus.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay,
Okay.
so she wrote this book on the history. I'm like, her press tour is probably so fun. My press tour is like abortion, sad girls, politics, unhoused crisis, like all of this stuff. And I'm like, damn, I like wrote this heavy book. On next book, I'm gonna write something like cotton candy, the history of cotton candy. And you're gonna be like, Sarah, let's talk about this. It's gonna be so fun. And I'm kidding, I'm kidding.
No, I know, but like, so going to that though, like something that I feel kind of weird about, and some of my questions maybe do this is like, so one of my favorite books ever is The Slotsway Dennis Cooper, which is one of the most like depraved, fucked up
Yeah.
books I've ever read in my life. But I like love it, and I
Mhm.
was like, I had a blast reading it, but like not, I didn't enjoy it. But like say like a similar thing for this book. I mean, there's so much sadness, and there's a lot of heavy topics explored. But I do think, do you know what I'm saying? Like there still could be fun to be found in like the joy of reading the book and talking about those things, but I hope I'm not being insensitive about the
No,
topics,
no,
like does that
no.
make
I
sense?
mean, no, listen, honestly, it's so crazy because I did this, the same thing happened with the tour for the Book of X. Like, if I'm going to take on these topics, like these are the things we're going to talk about, and we should, because here's the thing, the whole point of the book is that we talk about this stuff instead of thinking we're dealing with it alone. That's the whole point, you know? And so, but I just laugh at myself because like I am a fun time at parties. I just write really sad fucking books. Like like because I'm trying to understand too, right? Like writing for me is a form of trying to understand. And so these are things that I'm trying to riddle out and untangle. And I don't know if there's ever a great answer, you know. But hold on,
Right.
you were gonna ask something else. I feel like you were saying something.
Well, it perfectly ties to that, and just in terms of like, you know, grappling with these questions and trying to explore them within a novel. I mean, one question I always like to ask is when you knew that this was done, or do you ever feel that it's done, but you just have to, submit it?
I do think so. Book of X, I didn't have an agent when I sold that. It was just me and $2 radio. And so that editing process looked really different. In this case, I had an agent and we went through about 3 or 4 rounds of revision. And so that took years. And then after we sold it to Scribner, I went through another 3 rounds of revision with my editor. So that took another year and a half, maybe two. And so I spent a lot of time in the book with the book. And so I think I was ready to be done by the time it was done, just because I mean I have boxes and boxes and boxes of the printed out edited manuscripts. I just spent so much time with it that I think it was as good. I think this is true of all books, right? For a writer. And even when I look at the Book of X and I see flaws in it because it was a first novel and I was trying to figure out what a novel was, and I can see myself trying really hard to get it and I'm fucking up some parts, whatever. Um, all you do is the best you absolutely can at the time that you wrote it, and then it goes to press. And you just have to do, that's all I can, if I can say that about every book, I did the best that I possibly could do at the time that I knew how to do, then that has to be enough, or else I'll drive myself crazy. But no, it's never done. I mean, even when I go on book tour, I'm sure I'm going to read, every time I go on book tour, I read the sentences and someone's like, those sentences aren't in order. You read it different. Wait, you cut some words out. And I'm like, still, I still am editing as I'm on book tour, even though it's done and I can't change it. It's so sick. It's so sick.
Yeah, I mean, going from that too, and just like that experience of being on book tour, I'm wondering, I'm catching you like a few weeks before publication. I just wanted to ask you like how you're feeling right now with it coming out soon. Like, are you excited about things to come? I'm sure it must be a crazy experience, and I've never felt it, so I'm always curious to know what that feels like.
I have tried to learn that my favorite part is when I'm in my little bubble making the work. And this part is like getting flipped inside out. And this part is the capitalism. This part is the marketing. This part is, I don't want to say artifice, but it is. It's not the work. It's the making sure the work goes into the world and that people find it and that I can hopefully do this again. And so, but it is a lot. I mean, I still have a full-time job and that's very intense right now. It's at the same time, they're both just really ramping up. And so I'm trying to really figure out how to like make sure I have time to take care of myself in between because, now we've got it coming out in the UK and then it's going to come out in Italy and then it comes out in paperback in the US. So it's just like I can see the next 7 months of my life just like and so learning how to really prioritize some self-care and like make space for myself to not, yeah, I feel very seen when the work comes out. I feel like there's eyes on me, and that is always hard for me. It's so funny because I feel like there's some writers who love this part, who are like, I'm just waiting to go on book tour. I can't wait to get in front of people. I can't wait to do press. And I'm kind of like, I'll do it because I think I have to, and it's good for the book, and I want to be out there and support it. But I think my natural state is the like making part where you're in your little head making your stuff. So yeah, it feels vulnerable. It feels really vulnerable. Yeah.
That makes sense. And I mean, one thing, starting a podcast and asking authors to come on around when their book comes out, I'm naturally a part of that press cycle and working in that. But I try to make this podcast, I think, I don't know, I try to ask a lot of forum questions and kind of be back in the mind of the writer when they were writing it, hopefully. And
Yeah.
I guess I say all that just to say thank you for, being a part of it, because I know there's probably, conflicting feelings about it. And I hope I can be a point of hopefully like levity in that process. I don't know. I don't know. Like it's hard, but
It's not even like conflicting. It's just like you want to be good to everyone and you don't want to let anybody down and you want to make sure you're, thoughtful about all the different, I mean, this book touches on a lot of stuff that matters to people, and you want to make sure that you're trying to do this in a thoughtful way and you're not accidentally stepping on someone's toes, or you know what I mean? You just want to be as thoughtful and gracious as possible. But I love your questions and I will nerd out with you on editing and process at any time because I have a whole system that is just like stupid. But yeah, I feel very lucky, right? Like I feel very lucky that I landed on a major publisher. I've worked my whole life to get here and I never thought I would do it. So in the small moments, I can sometimes feel like it really happened. Local girl makes good.
yeah.
Hardcover? Get out of here. She's got a hardcover? Stop it.
I mean, it's so exciting. I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm glad we can nerd out, like, I mean, my last question for you and every author is just like books that you're reading, if you're reading, or is any favorites recently, just talking about books to round out the convo.
Oh yeah, okay, I could do this all day. So when I write a novel, I usually have a stack of books I want to be in conversation with because it helps me not start reading something super jarring. So I was definitely reading like The Bell Jar and Play It As It Lays. And then I love stuff in translation. So there's a book called Why the Child is Cooking in the Polenta that's translated by Vincent Kling. I think it's out on New Directions. It rules. It's about a little girl who lives in a family of Romanian circus performers and they're traveling Europe. And it's all from her point of view. And it's so gorgeous. I love that one. And then obviously I love like the Copenhagen trilogy, like Toby Ditlevsen, Sad Girls Love. Um, I'm reading some stuff right now to blurb it. I just read Cleaner by Brandy Wells. They wrote a book about a woman who cleans an office space at night and then starts getting involved in the lives of the people who work there during the day and thinking she's like way more. It's kind of Eileen-ish in that respect. She thinks she's like way more powerful than she is. So it's a really good one. And then can I be really honest? To give my brain a break, I've started reading like a lot of things that have been adapted. So I read like The Shining Girls by Lauren Bukes, which is on Apple TV. And then she has another book called Broken Monsters. It's a lot of like detective stuff's finding bodies. I don't know why, but I'm also really interested. Oh, I loved this so much. I wish we would talk about this more. I just read Let the Right One In, which also
Yeah.
became a horror movie. And it was so ahead of its time because like a third of the way through, the vampire reveals that they are not a girl and they're a boy, and the pronouns change. And this was written in like 2004, 2008. It was just like, it's so good. The prose is so condensed. It's a banger. It's a banger.
I have to read that. I've seen it before. I think I've seen the film, but the American version of it. So I need to like read the source material, you know?
The book is a hit, and it's like kind of like condensed flash fictiony sections. It's real nice. It's real nice. So I've been reading some stuff like that because I will say like I have to read a lot of books that are very literature heavy, and so it's kind of nice to just like let my brain read something that's just like plot, third person, there's a problem, we got to solve it. It's like very, just said to my agent as they're going, I'm gonna write a vampire novel. He's like, please do it. I'm like, I'm not gonna write a vampire novel.
I
No.
mean, my like love of fiction started with like Stephen King and like horror. I feel like it's always like my heart is always in horror, like in a sense. I always look for books such as Ripe that kind of play with that line.
Yeah,
So
I have found myself in the horror section of Skylight, and I'm like, who am I? Because I don't like, I would say one of my best friends is Tommy Pico, and we go to the movies every Monday. And Tommy loves horror movies and is always making me go see them. And I'm like this the whole time. And so like now I'm like reading horror and I'm like, who am I? Like, this is not what I do. Anyway, what have you been reading lately?
what have I been reading? I read so like my big feat recently was finishing 2666 by Roberto
Oh,
Bolaño.
wow. Did you like it? I haven't done it yet. I have to do it. I haven't done it yet.
It's huge. I loved it. I did it with the Center for Fiction in their like
Oh,
reading group
nice.
thing.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, it was led by Samuel Rutter, and like reading it with a group of like 15 people was so fun. And we did like one part like every couple of weeks, and so it kind of spaced it out. And I think that's the way to do it is like kind of take your time with it, at least for me. But that's like my big novel recently that I loved and kind of like broke my brain and made me rethink about like the possibilities of the novel and stuff like that. Not to sound like so
No,
I
no,
don't know
no.
woo woo about it, but it was great.
This is exactly why you have to be so careful what you read while you're drafting, because you'll read something like that and you'll be like, why am I not writing 1,000 page, and you're like, wait a minute, that's not what you started doing. Do not do that. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's definitely on my list for sure. I've been starting to read J.M. Coates, or A Disgrace, but I couldn't really, there's like some non-consensual sex happening. And I was like, I don't want to read that right now. I just couldn't do it, but it's
Yeah.
great. I'm like looking at all my books in my stack. There's so many. Oh, you know what? New Directions just released a book called, let me see if I can get it. No Longer Human. Is that it? Is that what I'm thinking of?
Oh, is it the one by
Yeah.
Osamu Dazai? Is
Yes,
that
I've
right?
been reading both of those books that just came out because they came out in that really beautiful like edition where they both look the same and they're like so cute together. But those are bangers.
Yeah, I read No Longer Human, I think last year, and that was like it's incredible. It's so
Yeah,
good.
there's another one that's out now that is also incredible that I gotta remember the name of. Cool. But yeah, I got those two and I've been tearing through those. So yeah, but I honestly my stack of books is so big. Like I just never have enough bookshelves. Yeah, so I have a lot to
Yeah,
read.
me too. I have like you can see these piles in the corner, but like this
I
is my only, space, but I got to go through it and like figure it out. But
It's
I don't
so
know.
funny because someone told me they're like, so for us, when a writer does that, you have to like rip out the page that might be signed because if someone finds it at like the donation place and it's like made out to you, it's like not
Yeah.
professionally not good. Yeah.
I
But
mean,
you
oh,
can't keep all these books forever. When I move, it costs me so much money. Like you can't see all my books. It's not good. I'm like, I can't have this many books. It's like unbelievable. Yeah.
yeah, and I know like some of them I'm not going to read ever, even though I think I might one day, or I've read them already and I'm never going to reread them. So it's like, what does it mean to own a
I
book? Like,
I
you
don't
know?
know. I don't know. And then like people send them to you. I know you probably get that too. Every day you're getting like, here's another book. Why don't you think about this? It's just like, damn, I have so many, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
So many books are published, and like whenever I get them, I want to read them, but it's like there's only so much time because it takes so much time to read a novel too.
I
Like,
know.
yeah,
That's the thing. I gotta tell you, when I think about like why I keep thinking about the way in which the time you write a book informs it, not just in terms of like the emotion, but like right now, my biggest competition is Twitter or your phone going off or Netflix releasing a new episode of Queer Ultimatum. Like, there's a million reasons not to read this book. And so like the form is really trying to like make it so you don't put it down. And that's like, I always get this. It's like, oh, it's a beach read though. And I'm like, kind of, because I know if I give you any reason to not look at this, you'll just never come back. And I do it too. It's not like a judgment call. It's just that like we are bombarded at all times. And so you have to find a way for someone to be like, I'll put my phone on airplane mode. I want to finish this. And that's a big ask now, you know?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's something. So my friend CJ and I, we did like a Patreon exclusive about TikTok and like the effect that that might be having on people's like attention spans and reading and stuff. So that's something that I'm really interested in to hear that it may be, something you were thinking about when drafting this, because it does
Oh,
kind of like you can't really put it down because it's constantly shifting and doing different things, and I love that personally.
so
Um,
this is going to sound so, I hate how I sound when I say this. This is my personal challenge is like, I always want to write a book that no one has written before. And some of that comes down to structure, right? Because if I can play with structure, then I know it's mine. I did something different. The other thing is you are having to kind of do acrobatics on every page. I mean, like when I think about this, if I think about this book as me doing stand-up comedy, I would be like dancing for my life. Like, don't look away. Whatever you do, no, 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 it's getting crazier. And so it's like kind of the same thing. And then another function kind of comes down to process, which is like, since I work full time, I have to only write like one scene a day. So I'll do a giant outline and then I break down each section into all the little scenes it would need, all the characters, all the settings. And then I write those on a note, like an index card. And so when I'm done outlining, I have a stack of index cards like this big, which is loosely every scene I absolutely need to have in the book for there to be a plot, right? And so when I write, I just sit down and pick a card and I write that scene. And certain scenes I have like a red X on because I know it's going to be really emotionally taxing. I know it's going to make me cry. I know that I'm going to need like to order dinner that night or do something that's going to like, you know what I mean? There's scenes that like hurt you to write sometimes. And so some of this is a function of only being able to write a scene a day and then hopefully making that scene really round and satisfying and ending with a gut punch so the reader enjoys it. But part of that is because that's how much time I have that day, you know? And so, yeah, I think about that sometimes. Would I write differently if I didn't have a job? If I didn't, maybe I would be writing 1,000 word novels. I don't know.
Yeah, but I think that's a good point. I mean, and kind of what you're speaking to before is like you kind of have to use what you have to make the art that you can, And I think what you've done though is like that's interesting hearing that perspective because I can kind of see it now, like reflecting on the novel, how that kind of translates. But I think you make it so cohesive and it works so well all together. And it's again, I keep saying this, but it is such a feat of a novel, and I love books that are so rigorous in
Thanks.
terms of their form, and I'm just excited by it. And so I'm so grateful that you came on and talked to me about it and to chat with you. I've been so stoked about this. So thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you. You've been a delight, and thank you so much for making such a kind space to discuss work. It really, really means a lot to me, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Big fan, and I hope you love your new job. I really do.
Thank you so much,
All right.
Sarah.